Okay, here we're going to do another example of finding the domain of a rational function. So in this case, I'm given the rational function g of x is equal to x minus 5 over x squared minus 25. So remember that finding the domain of g of x means that I need to find the restricted values first. I'm finding the pieces of, or the specific numbers that don't belong in the domain. So to find my restricted values, I set my denominator equal to 0. And again, this should be recognizable from maybe one of the previous videos, that x squared minus 25 is a difference of squares. Because x squared is a perfect square, 25 is a perfect square, it's 5 times 5. So this will factor into x plus 5 times x minus 5. And then, by the zero product principle, I can set x plus 5 equal to 0, x minus 5 equal to 0, and then solve for x. So subtracting 5 from both sides in the first equation, I get x equals negative 5. Adding 5 to both sides of the equation in the second equation gives me x equals 5. So those are my restricted values. Now then, if I take a look visually at this as a number line here, okay, the entire number line is part of my domain except for 2 points. Except where I've got x equals negative 5, and again, where x equals 5. So writing in my domain in interval notation, remember I'm going to start from my far left side and then keep going until I hit a circle. So I start out as far left as I can go is negative infinity, and I keep going until I hit negative 5. Negative 5 is an open circle. It's not part of my domain, so I use the soft parentheses there. Then I've got to connect it to my next piece. And my next piece this time goes from negative 5, and it keeps going until I hit the next open circle at 5. Again, open circle means 5 is not part of my domain. I use soft parentheses. Now I need to connect that to my last piece. So use soft parentheses for 5, and I go from 5 and I keep going out to infinity. So here is the domain of my rational function. It has 3 pieces in it. Now then, the last thing we're going to take a look at is just evaluating our function at different values. Okay? So the first thing we need to look is make sure that our function we're evaluating our function at a point that is actually in the domain. So I'm going to go ahead and write g of x. Oops, I won't write it in red though. I'm going to write g of x here so we can see it after I move to give ourselves a little more room to work out here. So g of x is x minus 5 over x squared minus 25. Okay, so when I do g of negative 10, now the first thing I want to notice, g of negative 10 is part of my domain, okay? Because negative 10 is sitting right here in this piece of my domain. So I know I can find a value for it. So g of negative 10, and remember, wherever I see x, I'm going to replace it with negative 10. So negative 10 minus 5 over negative 10 squared minus 25. So when I work this out, negative 10 minus 5 gives me a negative 15. 10 squared is 100. 100 minus 25 is 75. Right, well, looking at those two numbers, I notice they're both divisible by 5. 5 goes into 15 3 times. 5 goes into 75 15 times. Oh, now notice here though, both of those numbers are divisible by 3. So 3 goes into 3 one time, 3 goes into 15 5 times. And so my overall answer is, remember I still have that negative there, negative 1/5 for g of negative 10. Now I'm going to go to my next example, finding g of 0. So wherever I see x, I'm going to replace it with 0. So I have 0 minus 5 over 0 squared minus 25. So as I go through and I work that out, okay, 0 minus 5 is negative 5. Well, 0 squared is just 0. Minus 25 is negative 25. Again, I can see that both the top and the bottom are divisible by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 25 divided by 5 is 5. Now here I have a negative in the top and a negative on the bottom, so they cancel each other out, and this becomes a positive 1/5. So g of 0 is positive 1/5. And lastly, we have g of 7. So g of 7 is equal to 7 minus 5 over 7 squared minus 25. Okay, so 7 minus 5 is 2. 7 squared is 49 minus 25 will be 24. Notice both of those numbers are even, so I can divide by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 24 divided by 2 is 12. And so g of 7 is equal to 1/12.